If you love Baltimore sports, you'll love WNST.net.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest news items in sports that kind of got overlooked over the last week with everything that's happened is this 4-team playoff with the BCS. I think, for what it is and how long fans have asked for a playoff inside college football, really, I think for the commissioners of each individual conference to sit down, finally agree to a deal and actually, create this playoff to allow 4 teams. It's not quite what I wanted. I would have liked 16 teams, not unlike Randy Edsall, although I try not to compare myself too much to him after what he did to Maryland last year. But going forward, I think that we got a year until the playoff starts. I think it's huge because what it does is, as the last couple of years we've seen with the Big 12, Big 10, we started to see these conferences start to create these super conferences. So, SEC is already called the best conference in college football. But, whether or not that stands to be true or not, as we got forward, teams are going to start playing just better conference schedules just because, there's more teams for them to play. So I think the SEC gets a big rap as one of the best conferences for teams to play in, simply because teams have to play Alabama, LSU, Auburn, Arkansas. And you could go on. I mean, they've got the Kentuckys and Vanderbilts just like every conference does. But, SEC, if you look at a team who's, got 2 one-loss teams, one's from the ACC, one's from the SEC. I mean, they're generally going to take the SEC team. So what this 4-team playoff does, not 4-team conference, that'd be pretty small, but a 4-team playoff allows a school like Maryland, say they were to have a great year and be tied with an SEC school, say they're at 3, they'd be able to go into that situation. It also helps schools like Boise State, Utah, TCU. I think, last year in 2010-2011 season, TCU sat at 3 as Auburn and Oregon went to the national championship, and Auburn and Oregon played a pretty decent game that year. I mean, it was 22-19, and Cam Newton walked off of the field, but TCU, they took it to a very good Wisconsin team from the Big Ten, very good defensively, won the Rose Bowl 21-19, and it's hard to look at it and not think what could have happened if TCU would have had the opportunity to play in a playoff. I think what the playoff is going to allow to do is to have more parity throughout NCAA football, because we're really going to be able to see who the best team is. I think, look back to last year, and you have LSU and Alabama play 1-2. That might have been one of the absolute worst games I think I've ever watched. I know one of my good friends said that it was a defensive battle when him and I talked about it afterwards. And I like defense just as much as the next person, but there's only so many 3-and-outs I can stand. And if you look at the other teams going down the list, you had LSU at 1, Alabama at 2, Oklahoma State at 3, Stanford at 4, Oregon at 5. You have to think, Brendan Whedon at Oklahoma State at 3 and Andrew Luck at Stanford at 4. You had to think they might have been able to put up better numbers than Jordan Jefferson and A.J. McCarron might have. I'll give it to A.J. He was better in the second half, but I think last year a playoff would have been great. I think you had 2 of the better quarterbacks. Actually, both quarterbacks are drafted above Jordan Jefferson. A.J. still at Alabama, but you have to think that Andrew Luck was considered one of the best quarterbacks to ever come out of he is considered one of the best quarterbacks ever to come out of the NCAA, really since Peyton Manning. So this 4-team committee really, we've had so much doubt in the last couple of years. We've had a Cincinnati's, TCU's. You can't talk about a playoff without Boise State. They're really the whole reason this whole conversation started. It really leaves no debate for who those top 4 teams really are going to be at the end of the year. Now, the big question for me is the committee's great. We're going to have a selection committee to create a 4-team playoff, but what's the point of the committee if the BCS system's so great? How long have we talked about the BCS, and which people have said that the system's flawed, it overvalues strength of schedule, overvalues, plus wins, but yet, you got SEC teams who are considered to have a better schedule, yet they're playing Kentucky and, some school down the road that you've never heard of in the FCS. If the BCS is not the way to go to rank the teams to create the playoff, then why have it at all? If there's a committee, then why don't we do the whole 16, or whole 25 rather, out of a committee altogether like we used to with the AP and USA Today? The BCS is supposed to be a mathematical formula. It turned out to be an imperfect science, so I don't see how a committee can be any different than that. No one seems to argue in NCAA basketball. Obviously, the teams that don't make it are never going to be really excited and they don't make it. They're obviously going to find some kind of flaw, but going forward, I know it's multi-year. I think it's almost a decade that they've committed to doing this playoff, but I have to think that the further we go along in it in the first couple of years, there's going to be really no reason to keep the BCS. Again, if you look at it, SEC gets wildly overvalued, and if we were to have an accurately represented top 25, I think you'd see a much different picture of who's going to be at the top. I think right now, with the way the committee is going to be, it's going to create more exciting games. I mean, how many really prolific passing attacks did the SEC have last year? Jordan Jefferson and A.J. McCarron certainly weren't part of it. I mean, maybe Arkansas had one. I think Vanderbilt with Aaron Rodgers' little brother probably had a pretty decent passing attack. But what the committee and what the playoffs going to do is to be able to really just level the playing field and at the end make better football. And if the whole idea is about making money, and that was what the big hole, what's holding everyone back from it, I don't understand how you don't want a more exciting game, better game, more people watching. So, Nestor, what do you think about the 14 playoff?
Well, I think it's been 30 years coming. So, as to how they find the 4 teams, it's no different than how they would find 64 teams or 68 teams or however many teams they put in March now. Anytime you're electing teams instead of playing on merit. Hell, we got a baseball system right now, an unbalanced schedule, and teams are going to make the playoffs this year, and they're going to say, well, the Orioles only played Anaheim 7 times on the road and twice at home. So, the unbalanced schedule is always an issue. So I think in the NFL, they get as close to right as they can by switching it around. I've had people say, the Ravens have a tough schedule this year versus anybody else. So I think in college football, when you're only playing 9, 10, 11 games, whatever it is, over the course of the year, given real competition, you're not playing Pacific or, Towson going out to play Northwestern or that sort of thing, sort of the gimme games. I don't know how you go strength of schedule. I don't know how you say RPI in college basketball and still get a winner. I don't know if there's ever going to be a perfect system. There's always going to be a 5th team that's left out.
Right.
And how many times in college football in the last 20 years has there been a 3rd or a 4th team left out? Or how many times have there been schools that if they win all their games still don't get invited? I mean, you had the situation with Tulane. You had Fresno State one year. You had I'm trying to think of who else. There was another undefeated team that was it Texas Tech or one of the Texas teams? UTEP, somebody. A couple years ago, there was Houston. Yeah, but there was also a Texas team, I think, at some point that was 8-0 or 9-0, getting toward the end of the year, and had they won, they weren't going to get invited to the party anyway. Or they're going to get invited to a secondary bowl, not the BCS championship game. I mean, the BCS games, there's one game that mattered, the other games didn't matter. Right? The Terps won a BCS game, they played Florida, they got killed 51-10 or whatever. It will still be navigated and paid for by the big conferences. It'll still favor the big conferences. It'll still screw the little guy, which is, you're a political science guy. Isn't that what America's set up to do, to screw the little guy? Isn't that what happens?
Isn't that what's called capitalism?
I think that is called capitalism. It's it's how those clowns over at CBS Radio continue to survive year after year after year. So good audition. We will turn the tape off on.
If you love Baltimore sports, you'll love WNST.net.